Next topic. Here we go.
Yes, a tale of two storage devices, or a tale of two extended storage devices, uh, by way of PlayStation and Xbox. Um, there's not a whole lot to go over here. I think it's just kind of interesting that um, Sony has officially released the details about the PlayStation 5 extended storage strategy. And they released it in a beta, which is a bit odd, but it gives people a chance to play around with it, and it gives Sony the opportunity to see if there's any issues that they couldn't account for, especially in a feature like this where external storage devices can be plugged in left and right, and people will be reporting the experiences in a way that they probably could not test with an internal QA team, at least not cheaply. Do you want to go over the details, the specs that Sony asked for in order to accept a SSD in the extended storage
Sh-
slot?
Sure. It requires PCIe Gen 4, specifically 4x4, which is probably related to the number of channels in the protocol. But they're M2 SSDs, and there are 5 different formats that will fit. It's basically the length of the SSD card that would slot in. The minimum sequential reads are 5,500 megabytes per second, 5.5 gigabytes per second or higher, and that's the minimum. The higher it goes, the better. Um, they recommend that you add a heat sink to it, and if you haven't installed an SSD yourself, the chips, especially the ones that come for the higher rated devices, frequently get very, very hot because they're shuffling data around very, very quickly. And they generate, as a result of all that, the electricity flowing through it, they generate a lot of heat. So having a heat sink so that the heat has a way of escaping the SSD itself is important in many cases, especially if you're getting down to just barely above that 5.5 gigabyte per second limit. And so far, from what we've seen, it looks like the cheapest SSD that meets the requirements that I just outlined is the Sabrent Rocket, which comes in at $179.
I also want to
Sure.
go over the what the Xbox
Ah,
allows
yes.
for.
Okay.
Um, and basically, their strategy, if you're not familiar, is similar but different, pretty fundamentally. So
Yeah.
both Xbox Series consoles and the PlayStation 5 allow for extended storage. PlayStation 5 didn't have a storage solution immediately, besides USB plug-in, but that could only take PS4 games and not run PS5 games off of them. Um, whereas Xbox had something out the gate. But they opted to have a proprietary SSD. It's still
Yeah.
an M2 drive. It still meets their memory requirements, but like Sony, since Microsoft also has like very specific requirements as to what type of SSD you could include, they simplified it by saying you just have to buy this cartridge that's proprietary that sticks into the back of the box and gives you extended storage. Sony, like they've done with the PS4 and PS3 before it, said you can use whatever you want, but it has to meet these very strict requirements. I
Hmm.
do not know what the downside is to not meeting those requirements if they just reject them outright, but
Yeah.
that's a different strategy. The 1 terabyte option that Microsoft provides is provided by Seagate, and that price is currently at around $219. There have been sales on it, but $219 is the going price for it at retail. Unless, what are the obvious pros and cons to either strategy?
Well, the first, I'll quickly talk about the Microsoft's approach, and I will say that they didn't necessarily have to wait as long for hardware to catch up because their internal drive does not work as fast as the requirements in the PS5. Their approach to increasing, data transfer was, we're going to use an SSD instead of a spinning metal drive, which is already a huge jump from the previous generation. And on top of that, we're going to add some file access improvements to their API, the velocity architecture in their API system. allows them to make better requests from the files from the hard drive. So that theoretically improves their bandwidth, but uh, within limitations. So they were able to go right out of the gate. And what they did is they partnered with Seagate. They My assumption here is they wanted to do two things. One, control the types of drives that fit in their system, uh, just so that they would reduce the amount of support surface that they had to deal with. Right, like if I have a drive that I got off of eBay that's just a random hard drive that I put in, and I can't even tell what the manufacturer is because it's an OEM drive. How's Microsoft supposed to help me with that? How are they going to do all of the testing on all of the different hard drives and interfaces that they deal with? That's one thing. The other thing that it lets them do is have um, they build the system and control how the interface works with the system with their own proprietary stuff. On the flip side, we have Sony, right? You basically open up the drive and install it yourself. You screw it into into the machine. You have to take the big plastic side off of the console to access that, and you need a screwdriver in order to like move the get all the parts in. Doing a little bit of surgery on your device, which was also true with the PS3 and the PS4 if you added your own internal storage. Um, it's not bad, it's approachable, but it certainly isn't portable. And I don't know if anyone has tried taking a drive and moving it between devices, but my guess is that it won't work. It's probably locked to the device and the user profile for
Yeah,
whatever games
the
are on
drives have
there.
to get be formatted once you install them, so they're probably
Yeah,
linked to the uh, hardware that's plugged into.
but
I mean, it definitely adds a degree of difficulty that may escape, your average mom and dad who are looking at buying a PS5 and need to extend storage and have no idea that A, it's even in there, and B, it's possible. But for the
right.
hardcore gamers, um, the process is no more complicated than, I don't know, installing the foot stand to the PlayStation
Yeah,
5. So I don't think it's terribly difficult. I think most people who are more advanced gamers who've worked on their own PCs don't find this terribly daunting. But there is something that is already apparent, which is um, we're dealing with two different performance SSDs in either of the two consoles. With the
yeah,
PlayStation requiring a faster performing SSD in order to get the minimum spec, um, and already just by fact that market forces exist and there's plenty of people who produce SSDs that will fit the spec, you can get away with spending $179 and getting a 1 terabyte solution available. Whereas the Xbox, with its proprietary drive that is slower
yeah.
than the minimum spec, it still costs $220, and it will probably only drop in price when Microsoft decides to push it to do so. As you alluded to earlier, Eric, about performance, do you know how the SSDs in the PS5 are performing, and maybe some insight into what's going on?
Yeah, so I watched a video, specifically the Digital Foundry video, where they kind of reviewed the speeds that they were detecting on it. They got the beta installed on their machine, installed, I believe, a Seagate. No, it was the Samsung. But they what they found was interesting that the drive was apparently rated at 7.5 gigabytes per second, which is well above the threshold for the PS5. They the PlayStation 5 reported it as running at just under 7 gigabytes per second, which is pretty close. And it's very likely that the numbers that they show are for burst transfers. And by they, I mean the manufacturers of the drives. So in theory, it could hit 7,500 megabytes per second, but you'll only see that in rare circumstances. So they ran some tests and found that there were zero difference effectively between running a game like Ratchet and Clank, um, which is optimized to run on the PS5 storage, uh, either on the SSD or on the built-in drive that ships with the PS5. there was very little consistent. The differences that they did find were, I believe, in there were some differences in load times for PS4 titles where the Samsung drive was actually able to outperform the built-in drive. Now, the reason that you might be seeing this, like when running on the PS5, it's matching the internal drive and not going much beyond it in terms of loading times and whatever. And they allude to this in the video, as they suggested in the video, is the compression. A lot of the data assets that are on the PS5, the textures, the models, and whatever, are all hardware compressed, or they're in a compressed format that, when read through the system in PS5's internals, is hardware decompressed. That was a big thing that Mark Cerny announced when they did their developer, preview of the PS5 technology way back. And the theory goes that you're just kind of hitting the bandwidth limit for the decompression hardware. Was there anything else that you?
The other thing they allude to as well is that the internal drive is also running OS, so that there may be some limitations there, that some of the bandwidth is being eaten into, and you'll get better performance out of a high-performing extended drive just by the fact that it's not also running the OS.
Right. Yeah. Where the OS will occasionally have to interrupt and write stuff to the drive and read stuff back from it, which you have to enter the file request queue in some way.
Different strategies there. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, not particularly. I'm glad that both systems have a way to expand the storage, especially as more and more content is digitally delivered. And it's good to see that the drives are becoming available, and that Sony is making the hardware or the software able to unlock it, because I've heard from many people that their PS5 drives they're already doing system management on it, where they like delete games to make room for new games and whatnot. That's always a pain.
And so, I mean, I appreciate the fact that the drive prices are sort of modulated by the market forces, opposed to buying because there's a proprietary drive, which I never liked. I didn't like with memory cards. I didn't like with the proprietary hard drive on the Xbox 360, because you end up looking at those things and you're going like, 120 gigabyte hard drive should not cost $300 when you can buy one for $30. So it is nice to be able to slot in whatever makes sense for you.
Yeah.